Lightning, folks, and Moscow is completely without power.
Part of the neighborhood lost electricity. In
Moscow, a collapse is starting. Damn, cars are on fire.
Oh, that was a hell of a hit, damn. Fuck mindlessly.
3 days straight without a break. We're bombing Moscow.
A Molotov with a drone.
Muscovites are running out of their homes in panic. What?
Is the third one on fire already? Oh.
There was a total blackout in several districts of Moscow. In Rostov, it's a fiery hell. A warehouse is burning, explosions are going off one after another. The fire has covered almost 10,000 square meters. Yekaterinburg is shrouded in smoke. The country is drowning in fear. Crimea is facing massive traffic jams, a fuel and energy crisis. It's the fourth day of explosions. The largest oil terminal in Crimea is ablaze. The Rashists and occupiers are simply crying and sobbing. The FSB base in occupied Crimea was attacked by Flamingo missiles. Everything has exploded, everything is burning. The armed forces of Ukraine are preparing to deoccupy the occupied peninsula. They will be given everything. Solovyov, with a downcast face, realizes that support for Ukraine will not stop.
Let's be honest. Everything is heading towards war. Don't fool yourself with illusions, tomahawks. They will be given everything. They will be given everything. At the same time, I am sure that when the need arises, they will even be given tactical nuclear weapons.
This is already a Cuban missile crisis. Solovyov threw another tantrum over the possible supply of missiles to Ukraine. And
isn't the Tomahawk a nuclear weapons carrier?
Ukraine and Russia will soon sit down at the negotiating table, reports Trump. Well, of course, if we destroy all of Russia's energy infrastructure, plunge it into a total blackout, then of course it will crawl to us for peace talks. Friends, let's discuss all this and of course the week's results with the well-known journalist Olesya Bazman right now. We're live.
It's going to be intense.
Friends, December 14th, massive chaos at Sheremetyevo. In St. Petersburg, the power was cut off completely. Moscow airports are closed. There's panic, explosions, new strikes on Moscow. Petersburg is without internet, without communication. Drones are attacking St. Petersburg and Moscow. At Sheremetyevo and Domodedovo, at Vnukovo and Zhukovsky, for almost 7 hours, planes were neither departing nor arriving. Nearly 500 flights were delayed. In St. Petersburg, there were massive explosions. An industrial facility was attacked. Drones struck a military transport aircraft. And 26, an oil refinery is on fire in Yaroslavl, and in Orsk-Orenburg region, a mechanical plant was also attacked. All of this is happening against the backdrop of Trump making a statement that he is tired of the negotiation process. He is dissatisfied with both Russia and Ukraine, and he wants the war to end as soon and as quickly as possible. We'll discuss all of this as usual with a well-known journalist this weekend. Olesya, I'm very glad to see you. Olesya Bazman is with us.
Dasha, hello friends. I'm also glad to see you. I'm listening to you and I just want to keep listening. I realize that what I love most about our conversations are your announcements.
Well, listen, if we're having problems on the international negotiation track, at least the armed forces of Ukraine are demonstrating success with their attacks on Russia. How do you feel about the fact that, as of today, there is an aviation collapse in Moscow but not in St. Petersburg? Because our drones are attacking and the special services are shutting down communications. In general, Russia is gradually sinking into chaos.
Those who sow the wind will reap the whirlwind. And the war will come to them in ever greater volume. Because before, neither Moscow nor St. Petersburg nor the big cities noticed any of this at all. They really didn't care about anything. Well, it was somewhere far away. In Ukraine, Ukrainians were being killed. Well, so what? This really didn't bother anyone. Absolutely, not at all. But now when they start to feel it themselves, suddenly gasoline disappears. Suddenly, in a country that's the biggest gas station in the world, they even call Russia that. And now, all of a sudden, there's no gasoline. There are huge lines. Cars won't start, traffic jams. Strange, why is that? Then the power goes out. Also strange, why? Somewhere there are strikes happening, then the air raid siren goes off, or sometimes it doesn't even go off at all. They just don't turn it on, don't check it, don't activate it. Why would they bother? Why would they care about protecting their own people? And there are explosions at military facilities, at various sites. Oil refineries are burning, and now even at places where oil and gas are extracted. A precise strike was delivered. There are more and more graves, fresh graves of those who come back from the war, returning in coffins. This also can't help but have an effect. Look, prices for everything have gone up, and some products are simply unavailable. Sometimes for a certain period, they just don't deliver some things at all. And it's scary to fly on Russian planes. It's honestly scary now because it's always a gamble, pure Russian roulette. Will it crash or not? Will it go down or not? Will you make it to your destination or not somewhere? And why is that? Because everything is junk now. There are no Western parts, no Western repairs, no maintenance either. And as for decent machines or anything technical like that, Russia doesn't produce it just as it didn't before. It still doesn't now. I watch videos from car dealerships in Russia. The cars they make, the ones already on display in the showroom, they're all rusty. You see, that's the state their auto industry is in right now, their manufacturing in general. Well, listen, it's not us saying this, it's them. At a State Duma session, Matvienko spoke and exclaimed in frustration, "They don't even produce nails in Russia. What is this?" But it's true. That's the state they're in. And against this backdrop, the main desire and task facing Putin right now is to shut off the internet for them. In other words, to do everything so that the internet, as a phenomenon, ceases to exist in Russia. You see, they're constantly trying. One moment they want to block WhatsApp, then Telegram, then YouTube, then some game, that one that Russian teenagers use, then it's something else. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then there's talk about artificial intelligence. They talk, they joke, GPT. Basically, everything is harmful. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The main idea is something else. Why are some Russians surprised or even outraged? What country do you live in? What kind of government did you choose for yourselves? It's not about blocking Instagram. They basically want to destroy the entire internet so that essentially you wouldn't even have the concept of it. Why? Because the internet is access to information, it's access to the truth. And Putin doesn't want Russians to know the truth. He needs them to believe whatever they're told on TV. Iskabiva, Solovyov, Popov, Samanyan, all those people. That's it. Whatever they say, whatever they make up, it's pure absurdity, you know? It's complete utopia, really.
Yeah, and the fact is, there really is no internet anywhere anymore, no connection anywhere, but it's turning into some kind of concentration camp. You see, Russia has basically turned into a concentration camp. No connection, no internet, completely blocked off. In China, yeah, they have their own internal internet, their own internal network. They can't access the outside world at all. Everything is there for them. You see, it's total censorship. That's what Russia has come to by 2025. How do you feel about it right now? Donald Trump's statement? So, Dmitry Ilyich and I were talking last week, that Trump is already tired. He doesn't want to meet with anyone anymore, not until something is signed. Look, Le Monde immediately puts out a story saying that Ukraine agrees to the creation of a demilitarized zone in Donbass. Ukraine immediately says, no, the troops will not withdraw from Donetsk region, and that's why we do not agree to any demilitarized zone for now. How do you assess this current information war that's going on, and of course the negotiation track?
Ushakov just stated that we allow for the possibility that Russian troops will withdraw from Donbass, from this zone. Yes, there won't be any Russian troops there, and there won't be any Ukrainian troops either. But there will be the the National Guard, he said. He said, like, yes, the National Guard will be there. Look, what are negotiations? Well, negotiations are obviously the art of the possible and the impossible. But it's always a huge number. It's not just talks, discussions, arguments when delegations meet face to face. It's always also a war. An information war, a war of fakes, a war of disinformation, testing certain information on the population, on the people. It's the testing of certain ideas through various stories. In other words, it's when someone tries to push you towards something to lead you in a certain direction, presenting wishful thinking as reality. So negotiations at this level are always a big, big game. And many people take part in this game. In our case, there are a huge number of countries involved, so many interested parties, you see, and the stakes are incredibly high. That's why, of course, there will now be a lot of information appearing that won't correspond to reality. We need to pay attention only to what and who makes official statements, and I mean trust and analyze only those. So there's this and there's that. Why? Because there are a lot of provocations. There will be all kinds, and that's understandable. And well, I repeat, it's part of the process. The negotiations are going hard, very hard, that's true. Even, for example, the fact that as of Monday, I read the version that was on the table of the European leaders who were meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky at that time. Now, at this point, a few points there have undergone slight changes, not significant ones. So the main things remain there. And basically, I can confirm, look, when they showed it to me, we didn't make the whole text public. We made that decision on purpose. Why? Because right now the price of every single word is too high. And it's often better to wait for what will ultimately emerge and then thoroughly discuss it, carefully agree or thoughtfully disagree with it, and provide your own thorough assessments. But overall, right now, the comprehensive plan that ultimately went to America, and we clearly understand first and foremost, it exclusively went to America, meaning it absolutely hasn't gone to Vladimir Putin yet. And that's a completely different story. And here the question is what position Trump will take, what he will do. Because logically, from every conceivable angle and perspective, whether he genuinely desires it or not, he is unequivocally compelled to pass the crucial ball directly to Russia's hands. And when it comes to President Vladimir Putin, it is abundantly clear that he, with his unwavering stance, absolutely will not pursue or agree to any form of peace settlement. Even under the conditions currently outlined in the peace agreement, in my opinion, he won't go for it. No matter how much we might want it or not want it, there are points in there that I think Ukraine will absolutely not agree to. But even in this form, I think Putin will not agree to end the war. And at that point, Trump will simply have to turn his back on him, which means it means imposing maximum sanctions. It means providing weapons. It means starting to apply pressure on all fronts, but on him, not on Ukraine. Yes, he was tempted by this before, and he still is now, to end everything at the expense of the weaker side, at Ukraine's expense. I don't think anything will come of it.
Look, I'm watching the situation and I see that Trump wants to put the blame first and foremost on Ukraine, including them as well. He doesn't want to say that he's to blame for everything, Putin, because if he says that, then he'll have to act, impose sanctions, and so on. And he's not ready for that. Now, you see, Caroline Levitt, whom we all love, comes out and starts saying that both Ukraine and Russia are to blame. In other words, she is dividing the responsibility between the aggressor and the victim. And in doing so, or rather, the White House is protecting itself from Trump imposing sanctions. What do you think? How should the office, Zelensky, I don't know, maybe our diplomats try to trick Trump so that Trump comes out and says Ukraine agreed, but Putin did not? That's why we're now putting pressure on Putin, well, so to speak. Do you see any strategic or tactical moves by our diplomatic team to make sure Trump doesn't equate us, so to speak?
Yes, just give me 2 seconds. I just need to reply to a message. Sorry about that. Yes. So look, here's what I think about the negotiations. I think our negotiating team is handling this track very successfully. And in fact, taking into account all the peculiarities of Donald Trump's character and his team's specifics, we're squeezing the maximum out of the impossible. And that's exactly where things are heading. But that's just how it is, in fact. Because Ukraine is actually agreeing to this and that and everything else. Just let's talk about this and that and maybe adjust things here. But Ukraine is on board. The point is, it's Putin who's against it. And Putin, you see, he's already thrown Trump into the mix. So, right here in this situation, it seems like he wanted Ukraine to be at fault. But Ukraine is managing to get out of it. All right. He throws a new idea to Trump. Hey, why don't you tell them about the elections? Hey, say this, that elections are needed. Listen, what's the point? What does Trump have to do with the elections? Why would Trump care about elections in Ukraine? And why doesn't Trump ask Putin? Putin, listen, in your country, Russia, you basically haven't had real elections for a long time. Mark Fagan tells me they've never had real elections there. Not once have they had democratic ones. I wanted to say I was talking about the fact that there were elections in Russia, well, back in the beginning, right? When Yeltsin ran for the first time, when he came to power, those elections were free, but after that, we all know how things went. How he kept winning after that. They put a gun to Zhuganov's head and so on and so on. So it didn't even start with Putin. And Feigen tells me, no, come on. He says, I've been in politics for a long time. I know there have never been any free, democratic, honest elections there at all. So here's the question. Why wouldn't Trump reach out to Putin and say, listen, Putin, why don't you hold, well, if you really want elections in Ukraine so badly, then let's do it together out of solidarity or something. You haven't had elections for so long. Just for a change, why don't you hold them in Russia? You know, with international observers coming in, all that, allowing all your opposition candidates to participate. Come on, there are some opposition figures there, right? There really are some decent ones, though many of those who call themselves opposition are, well, rather peculiar. Still, listen, just let anyone you want participate in the elections. Basically, that's the kind of fairy tale we're talking about. Well, why not? If Putin is interfering in our agenda, if he's trying to tell us what to do inside our own country, then we should respond in kind. Just respond symmetrically. Please go ahead. If you want to hold elections, then fine, let's do it that way. But the war has to end first. So first the war must stop and then elections, because why is Putin doing all this in the first place? So Trump, well, I'm sure he's talking about this like, yes, elections, fine. But in reality, there weren't any real elections. But that's supposed to be democracy. He doesn't even think about why Putin is doing this. But for Putin, it's yes, of course, he would love to replace Zelensky because he thinks, well, Zelensky is uncooperative. There's no way to reach an agreement with him for Ukraine to capitulate. Maybe, just maybe, someone else will come to power. It's an illusion, even if someone else comes. Putin's main objective during the election campaign is to destabilize the situation inside the country to such an extent that it leads to mass unrest, bloodshed, chaos, and armed clashes. In other words, this is what he hasn't been able to achieve on the front lines with his army. He wants to do it from within, that is, to undermine the country. That's his main goal. You see, that's why he needs to launch the start of the election campaign. That's why Ukraine agrees to hold elections, but only after the war is over. Of course, of course. Look, you and I really aren't going to engage in any speculation or read some analytical memos or media with various sources. Let's take President Zelensky as the primary source, his statement, and proceed from his words, because at the very least, that's official information. So the so-called US peace plan, in quotes, assumes that Russia will withdraw its troops from the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk regions, Zelensky stated. As for the occupied parts of the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, the line of demarcation there should remain along the current front line. Regarding Donbass, the US proposes that a free economic zone be established in the territories controlled by Ukraine. But Ukraine must withdraw its troops from there, Vladimir Zelensky reported. Let's talk about this. This is the official statement from our president. Well, I truly think that we should definitely talk about this particular matter when we have a moment. We are faced with the question that there is this proposal, which Russia agrees to. And here I think that the first one who utters any word about it will again be Zelensky. Why? Because look, in fact, what we're talking about is Ukraine giving up part of its territory. From a legal point of view, let's first talk about the law, and then from some kind of moral perspective. From a legal standpoint, the president of Ukraine, regardless of his last name, does not have the right to sign any acts, agreements, or anything else that would change territorial integrity, that is, move the Ukrainian borders, give away, or annex territory. In other words, this is not within his authority. That is, territorial issues can only be resolved with the involvement of the entire people. That means a referendum. As for referendums, we know that the implementation of referendums in Ukraine has never been completed. It's still a gray area. There is no clear provision that the results of a referendum are mandatory for execution. It's not established as law, it can be merely advisory. Then it goes to the Verkhovna Rada, then a constitutional majority, then several sessions, and so on. It's a long, massive process. All these institutions, bodies, and procedures will have to be carried out, you understand? So right now, I don't even want to discuss it. As a matter of fact, I'm just discussing it in general. From the point of view that if this provision is actually proposed in a peace agreement, then to implement it, you see, you would need to go through and draft a huge number of different decisions and involve various structures. So it's not like President Zelensky will just pick up a pen and sign it, and that's how it will be. He simply doesn't have the right to do that. And of course, he himself says this because otherwise he would immediately be held responsible. Why would he do that? You see? That's why right now all he can do is discuss it. He suggested to us, told us that in the US there's such an idea, like, listen, well, the idea there was different, but what's new? What did he say? The idea was even worse originally. When those 28 points were announced, the idea was basically, you just leave here, just hand this over to Russia. And now it's supposedly called, look, well, in fact, it's still the same thing. The substance hasn't changed, but now it's called economic. There's a free zone, or not a free zone, like demilitarized zones. Well, Ushakov already said, yeah, the Russian army will leave, the Ukrainian army will leave, but there's no Russian army there. That's the whole point, you see? He says they will leave. The Russian army, this is Ukrainian territory, our land. So basically this means to give it away, just hand it over, and the Russian army won't be there. Well, the National Guard will be there. So what is that? Who is this even meant for, you know? I repeat, I don't even want to discuss this issue. This is a very sensitive issue. This is an extremely important issue that can't be considered separately at all. It can only be considered or even discussed at all if we're talking about it seriously as part of a package with security guarantees. Because without the security guarantees placed on the scales, ironclad guarantees for Ukraine that Russia will not be able to repeat its attack, its aggression against us, this shouldn't even be brought up for discussion, you understand. Not even considered, not even discussed. Because the main thing is, well, look at Cambodia, Thailand. Yes. Now, here's a story for you about how Trump ended 8 wars. Well, he ended them. Here's one of the 8. A month and a half passed, and they're fighting again. Why? Because that's how it was ended. Not all the nuances between them were taken into account, all the complexities. And there were no security guarantees, no guarantees against renewed attacks. In other words, that aggression wouldn't start again. You see? Why is that? Do you remember Trump's and Pence's outbursts of irritation and aggression, which always triggered something in Volodymyr Zelensky, when they said, that's it, the war needs to end it, what does Ukraine want? And Zelensky would respond, yes, we agree, but we need security guarantees. As soon as Zelensky mentioned security guarantees from them, so they immediately started to say, they just don't want to listen to it. It's unpleasant for them. Straight up, they're like, and this is the most important thing, because if it is not written down and not the Budapest Memorandum, not this piece of paper that simply flew out the window and everyone forgot about it, no, it has to go through the congresses, through the parliaments of the countries that guarantee us something. It has to be like a law for them. Even in this peace agreement, I repeat, I read it back on Monday, and still the article remains, meaning it says that Ukraine will be given security guarantees. For example, mirroring the security guarantees of NATO's Article 5. That's true, it's a good point, but the question is who will provide them and how it will be written out, how it will work. So the mechanism isn't just about writing it down, but then if something happens, what then? As usual, they just call consultations, calm down, disperse, and nothing gets decided at those consultations. And then Ukraine endures a new attack, this time from an even stronger, more empowered Russia. Just look at what's actually happening with NATO's Article 5. But when Russian drones enter the territory of NATO countries, when Russian military planes enter the airspace of NATO countries, what did they do? Well, ideally, what should they have done? They should have just shot all of that down, right? Moreover, NATO countries, even without involving any of their partners, this is a direct violation of their airspace, unauthorized, especially by military objects. There can't be two opinions about it. Not only do they not shoot anything down, not only do they not take any action themselves, they called a NATO countries consultation once. That was under Article 5. First, you have to call a meeting, consult, and then, in fact, everyone should get involved and defend the one who was wronged. Look, the NATO member countries were called together. There are facts, concrete facts of violations. Everything is clear there. What did they do after the consultation? How did those consultations help them? Nothing. In no way. They consulted, they talked. Yes, they said maybe even a taxi, as the Estonian representative put it very well at the time. He said, so maybe even a taxi will just come to us. You know, we have a border with Russia right here, but what if Russian tanks just drive into us? So based on this example, what are you suggesting then? Not to touch those tanks, maybe ask them how they're doing, and if they say they just stopped by our McDonald's, should we just call them a taxi and see them off, or what? Do you understand? So all of this is correct, but the devil is in the details. We need to understand how it's written and in what way these guarantees will be backed up, what will ensure them. You know, to sum up our conversation today, the most important question remains unanswered. Right now, almost all world leaders, starting with Stab and Emmanuel Macron, are saying that the end of the war is near. But I don't see the end of the war being anywhere near at all. But why do you think all our partners keep saying that we're just 2 meters away from the end of the war? Just 2 meters. From signing a peace agreement? What do they know that we don't, being here in Ukraine? First of all, they're all tired. Even though it's Ukraine that's fighting, they're the ones who are tired. Yeah. Secondly, they all, in one way or another, hope that they'll be able to put pressure on Ukraine, on Zelensky, on President Zelensky, and that he will actually sign whatever ends up on the table, well, after some adjustments. They really are counting on that. For some reason, not taking into account the Putin factor, you know, because that's where the big question is, as always. Well, that's good. The important thing here is just that, again, when all of this gets there, he'll refuse, and then the ball will be in Trump's court. Next point. Well, let's not forget that all these people mentioned above, basically over the 4 years of the big war, have said more than once or twice that the war could end any moment now, that it's close, that it's almost over. Because no one knows when this will end. Honestly, no one knows. Trump doesn't know. No one knows, not even Zelensky knows. It's impossible to predict right now. So when we talk like this, well, yes, we really want it to end. But I think that now, when they make such statements, first and foremost, they're guided by the fact that what's currently on the table already with these adjustments, already discussed in Europe, sent to America, that this is what Ukraine, in the person of President Zelensky, will sign. I think that's their reasoning.
Friends, we're interested in your opinion because there really are so many things. 3 documents: security guarantees, the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war, and a document with 20 points. All of this was discussed this week. Every week, at the end of the week, Olesya and I meet up on the weekend and discuss what the coming December has in store for us. Yes, so to speak, Christmas is just around the corner, and we're discussing both the military track and the political track, and of course, Trump's statement. Of course, friends, you all want a miracle to happen next week. Now, to wrap up, Olesya will say what she personally expects from next week. That's the 20th. Oles, for the finale, what do you expect from next week? Do you have at least, I don't know, a bit of optimism? Or should we be realists and wrap up today's broadcast in a reserved way?
Well, what do I expect? I expect that our struggle will continue. I expect that there are still many hard days ahead for Ukraine, and first and foremost for the Ukrainian guys, men, women, and girls who are on the front lines. I expect that everyone who is not on the front, everyone who wants Ukraine to stand strong and win, will continue to support the Ukrainian front. Each person doing what they can, however they can in their own place. I expect that none of us will give up, that none of us will just go with the flow. And no one will say, I'm tired, that's it, I'm ready for anything. That's what I expect won't happen, because I know the spirit of our people. And in the end, 4 years of the Great War. Before that, the war that began with the annexation of Crimea, with the occupation of Donbass, that's been going on since 2014. Since 2014, Russia has been at war with Ukraine. And despite all this, you see, Ukrainians are still full of strength, fueled by their anger. It's this sense of injustice that arises from the whole situation. You see, it's a unique story. Just yesterday evening, I was talking with one of our good friends from the US, from Washington, and he says, well, really, how is Kiev? How is Kiev now? How is Ukraine? How is everything? Well, is everything really bad? Or is it like, I said, well, everyone is working. Everyone is doing their job. Of course, no one is exactly happy, but what are the options? We have to survive. So every day, even after a missile strike, everyone gets up, even without having slept. People go to work. Children go to school. There are bomb shelters, but life goes on. Restaurants are open. Stores are open. Businesses are operating. Pensions are being paid. Electricity is available. Even if it's just a little, it's still being provided. Those who could bought themselves some generators. And he tells me, he says, Ukrainians are unique. No one, neither America nor Britain nor France nor Italy, if such a disaster happened, if things were like this, if such an attack happened to them. But he says, I can't imagine them holding out like this, standing strong like this. He says, everyone would have collapsed. He says, in America, when it snows, even just a little bit, in regions where it usually doesn't snow at all, everything comes to a halt, everything freezes, everyone is in shock, everyone panics, no one knows what to do, nobody goes to work, and as a result, there's an economic collapse and a moral collapse too, and immediately everyone rushes to psychiatrists. To treat depression, pharmacies close down because they run out of antidepressants. You see, here everything is different. That's why, well, of course, there's optimism. We have it because it's always there. We live and survive together with it, but we'll see what happens next. We'll keep analyzing.
Friends, don't go to psychiatrists. Watch us with Olesia Baskova instead. Every week. We guarantee to lift your spirits. Olesia Bazman, a well-known journalist. Olesia, thank you so much and see you next week.
Well, you can go to good ones, but really in this case, it's better to see psychologists than psychiatrists, because psychiatrists are for when things are really, serious. Let's hope that those who do go get the help they need from specialists, and those who don't won't need it. Yes, and at least Dasha and I can lift your spirits a little. We can at least cheer you up a bit. Thank you.
Friends, don't go anywhere. See you next week.